Are you ready, kids?
Hello, it's Employee a Million, and welcome back to SpongeComs. This is episode 5, where I'll be covering Pizza Delivery and Home Sweet Pineapple, both of which aired on August 14th, 1999. And these are two really, really great episodes that I love. This is the point in season 1 where I really start to feel like SpongeBob is going forward, which is why I was a little harsh on last week's episodes, but that's for another discussion entirely. But before we start, my question of the week this week is, what is your favorite SpongeBob meme? Reply in the comments and I might put it on the show next week. Pizza Delivery was written by Sherm Cohen, Aaron Springer, and Peter Burns, but its animation director Sean Dempsey really does make this episode something new. That's what I feel like. The animation in this is pretty unique. It does elevate it above what season 1 was at that point. It makes it a lot more expressive and a lot livelier. And I think that's a good thing that they saved this concept for a little later than was intended, because this was one of Steven Hillenburg's earliest ideas for the show. Like, he watched a bunch of, classic buddy comedies as inspiration, and thought of the idea of SpongeBob and Squidward being stuck in the desert and having them be friends or have to develop a friendship through that. And yeah, some even say that it was going to be the pilot episode before he just made it them going to the Krusty Krab. But I think that it was just an early idea that was translated into the 5th or 6th or 7th episode in production order. And yeah, what we got out of that was my personal favorite episode of season 1. I know I'm not alone in that. Yeah, this episode is mostly about SpongeBob and Squidward's different perspectives. SpongeBob's an optimist, Squidward's a pessimist. You can see that through every crevice of this episode. Every bit of animation does sort of convey that, and I find that really fun. Squidward here is being lazy and not wanting to drive, and that is what kickstarts the bigger part of the conflict of this episode, because already we have the Krusty Krab pizza, which isn't meant to exist at all. And we've also got some good continuity already, because SpongeBob is nervous behind the wheel, again. So I am pretty happy that they pushed it a little back. As I said, it made it a little better in hindsight. And you'll see here the English on that changes to Korean, because I don't know if that was an intentional choice, if it was supposed to just be mumbo jumbo, but this episode, most SpongeBob episodes are animated in North Korea. I think North Korea or South Korea? Korea. So I think that was just added by the background painters over there. And that's a nice little genius bonus if you ever wanted to know exactly where SpongeBob is made. And yeah, the backgrounds in this episode are pretty excellent. You've still got that rustic feel, you've still got that surrealism, but there are a lot of little bits and pieces here that give it a little more life. You'll see in about a minute or so, when the trucker comes around, they blur it a little, and I don't think that blurring was done in post. I think that blurring was just how they designed the background painting. And this is a great joke, the boat running away from them, and them having to go on foot, which is a joke later explored in the movie, but it's a little more intense there. And we're getting pretty close to what I have to consider my favorite SpongeBob meme, at least at the moment. It could be overtaken by something like 2020 or 2021, but this is my favorite SpongeBob meme coming up, Spoons Rattling. And it's basically this still frame of SpongeBob hitchhiking in the cowboy hat with his arms twisted, and there's the caption "Spoons Rattling" on the DVD and TV, and that's for a few frames after that, with Squidward playing the spoons as if to accentuate SpongeBob's little hitchhiking routine here, and it's excellent. It's right there, just in case you want to sync up. And this is the background painting I was talking about there. It is really fun when you get back to these great episodes and see little touches like that give it a little more life. And this is, we get a bit more of a visual like indicator of where SpongeBob and Squidward are in this sandstorm scene, Darude Sandstorm. I think that was released around this time, so yeah. You don't know what Darude Sandstorm is, do you? Okay, but yeah, SpongeBob is holding on to this and Squidward's trying to drag him down, and I think that his pessimism is a bit of a help here because he is looking out for SpongeBob's safety in a small way. See, he's literally trying to drag SpongeBob down, and SpongeBob has his hopes high. I don't know if that was intentional or if it's just me reading too far between the lines, but it is kind of fun. Yeah, this sandstorm scene is pretty good. It's pretty good, and it just spits them out. And the pizza's a parachute, because why not? SpongeBob needs all the safety he can get. Now I think I better talk about like the hitchhiking techniques and what they add to this episode, because it's another facet to it. SpongeBob just thinking about these hitchhiking techniques, or like these pioneer techniques, that he was getting from a movie once that he saw. And that's just kind of, it drives what he wants to do while stuck out here. And I think that's pretty good. While Squidward just follows his cynical instincts, and that gets them into a bit more trouble. Of course, the hitchhiking at the start isn't going to translate well into this modern era, but everything else, maybe this Krusty Krab pizza song is meant to be pioneer good luck. I don't know, but pioneers, it is mostly talking about people on the trail in like the 17th and 18th centuries, 18th or 19th centuries, whenever like America was discovered. I'm not good with American history, but I am good with SpongeBob history, and this is a classic, so I'll get back to that. And yeah, more animation goodness over here. Just the sloshing motion of Squidward's face here is brilliant. I love it. And you can see a little bit of a dent in the background painting a bit further back. I don't know if that was... It was certainly not intentional, but I don't know if it was because it was crumpled up or because they had to layer it over with another one. But yeah, more pioneer antics right here with SpongeBob not really understanding why Coral isn't that good. And here we have some more interesting, more in-depth sort of rivalry between SpongeBob and Squidward, with them lusting over the pizza because it's the only real food in sight. And I really like this scene. It does sort of prove that SpongeBob and Squidward are getting tired of each other, and Squidward is trying to either tempt SpongeBob or himself and make the customer upset or something. Don't know the full intentions, but it is up to interpretation. But the point of the scene is that Squidward is the little devil on SpongeBob's shoulder, the plankton, as it were, and that is building a wedge between them as SpongeBob is kind of starting to get fed up with Squidward's pessimism now. And that's really good. And you'll see, especially if you're watching on a digital HD release, that SpongeBob's cells kind of cut off towards the end of these panning outside montages. Sorry, not montages, little shots. Yeah, when you're doing commentaries and you have to keep improvising with only a few notes, you're bound to get a few things wrong. But this is also more great animation up ahead. Thank you, Aaron Springer. You're doing real good now. With SpongeBob constantly sharing we're saved. This is all great stuff. I don't know if they had these sort of motions saved up or if they used them on this episode, but if they did, this is great improvisation of showing just how excited SpongeBob is. And The Rock is such a great way of just concluding the pioneer stuff and showing that they knew a few things. They did a few things right. Even if they were completely ridiculous, like being able to drive rocks. And it's also the peak of SpongeBob's optimism because he can do that, despite not being able to drive a boat, which he couldn't do in boating school just last week, and he couldn't do here. And this also serves as a good point to see where Squidward does start to trust SpongeBob a little, even if it isn't kind of shown here. Like, after he gets run over and proven wrong about the pioneers, you don't really see any kind of bad blood between them until SpongeBob gets yelled at. I mean, it's just one small scene, but Now, this is probably the most controversial character in season 1, the horrible customer to SpongeBob. In my opinion, I think he just pranked the Krusty Krab. This is just a prank, bro. Because I'm sure he knows that the Krusty Krab doesn't serve pizza. It's like asking Pizza Hut to serve burgers. And yeah, I think that just makes this scene a lot harsher because he did deliberately want to upset SpongeBob, but it also makes it a bit more logical in the context of this episode. And oh my gosh, SpongeBob is absolutely distraught here. And this is where Squidward finally realizes that SpongeBob was doing a good. He was being optimistic. And he has to stand up for his little buddy. And I think that's what makes these sorts of Squidward episodes work. That eventually he does have to see that SpongeBob is just a little boy in terms of attitude. And this is just a great Squidward moment all around, where he gives the customer the pizza, slaps it in his face. And it ends the number 1 episode of season 1, or at least my absolute favourite of season 1. One last bit of trivia: Are My Aching Tentacles is cut in certain airings. I think it's not because it sounds lewd, but rather because of, time constraints. Time constraints! Home Sweet Pineapple was written by Ennio Teresen Jr., Eric Weiss, and the mysterious Mr. Lawrence himself. This episode starts off with some nematodes coming around and messing things up. Nematodes really just feed on algae and fungi and a lot of creatures that are a lot smaller than themselves, but here they can pretty much eat anything, including rocks and cars. I'm guessing those rocks and cars were made of algae or fungi, or maybe Stephen Hillenburg just wanted the nematodes to act quote-unquote unrealistically. Sorry, Fred. And this is a pretty good, nice, surreal idea for an episode. Nematodes destroying SpongeBob's house, not by wrecking it up, but by drinking from it, making it shrink. And you're going to see up ahead that there is some very noticeable chroma keying here. Oof, that does not look good on the digital release. You can really tell. But I understand why they have to do it, because you can't really have cells on a moving background. It'll not look right. But, SpongeBob's house is getting smaller by the minute, and I guess the best thing to do would be to get out of it. But you know what? At least SpongeBob doesn't shrink. Gary doesn't shrink, even though it kind of looks like it's going to happen here as his voice gets higher on the phone. But, he and Gary are fine. Their house isn't. That's the point of the episode, that they're homeless now because nematodes came around. And I kind of like Patrick's joke here about putting on a magician outfit to ruin Squidward's day. It isn't malicious or anything. It's just Patrick being a bit of a goofball. And yeah, I think that the point of this episode was to add a bit more pathos to the show. Like, you'd had some pretty slow-moving episodes already, like Bubble Stand, but I think that an episode like this that is more emotion-driven was a good addition to the early lineup of the show, because these episodes were bordered and animated and voiced out of order. Like, this was probably like the 26th episode. And I think it was a decent idea to have this be one of the first 10 or 11, because it just makes us care about the characters a bit more. Like, I talked previously about how the slower episodes were added so that people could relate to SpongeBob, they could understand the world pretty easily. Like, if it started with, I don't know, Muscle Bob Puff Pants, then it wouldn't be as relatable. And here we see SpongeBob's parents for the first time, and here's another one of these times where Patrick does try to genuinely help SpongeBob out by building him a new house, and it doesn't work out, but, Patrick's putting in the effort. And that panning shot was genuinely good. I like that. Something you'll notice about this episode is that it does get a bit, it's noticeable whenever they change backgrounds, because in daytime, sometimes they're purely blue and sometimes they're early morning backgrounds, like a blue, green, and yellow mixture. You could tell a bit further back with Patrick's close-up before he starts hammering, and his hammering here is pretty good. It's not totally distracting, it always sells the mood of the shots. It's just fun to point out whenever you're looking back on certain shots, when you're watching this episode a million times. A million. And I think that this is a good payoff to this scene, the house not being able to fit SpongeBob. And I think a more noticeable animation error coming up ahead when Patrick says, "We'll be rockmates," is that all their color palettes are switched to nighttime. I don't know why that is. But yeah, it does sort of transition into the nighttime scene. And the nighttime scene takes up about half this episode, and it is something alright. It gets incredibly slow. There's pretty much next to no talking until SpongeBob goes into Squidward's house, which is like 3 minutes up ahead, 3 or 4. Most of it is just him having to deal with Patrick being a loud, obnoxious sleeper. And I think that these are just some leftover jokes from Rocko's Modern Life, honestly. Because Steven Hillenburg, one of his earliest episodes of that was Bedfellows, where Heifer has to sleep with Rocko. Or Heifer has to crash with Rocko, and you can tell that these are probably some jokes that he had lying around in his head after that episode finished. But yeah, I think that these jokes are pretty slow, but pretty good. You've got a lot of the inconveniences with sleeping with someone else, like having to share the blanket, having to put up with their sleeping, maybe having to put up with their night terrors if they're still having those. And I like how Gary just can't deal with this. He's stuck in his shell. He doesn't want to wake up. He just wants to sleep. But we also get another great SpongeBob visual up ahead when he gets all clogged up with Patrick's saliva. I really like it when he has to waddle around. That is a really great visual. It's one of my favorites of this episode. You'll see it up ahead. And that is a lot of saliva coming out of Patrick. He does eat a lot. Don't know if that has any correlation to it. There's my thick Bob. Oh lordy coming. I really hope that becomes a meme. So anyway, there isn't really much to talk about because this scene is pretty slow, but it does culminate in spiders. I like that moment. Yeah, I'll just stop the recording now because there isn't really much to go on about. And we're back! Right after these second spiders, just in case you're trying to sync it up, because I would be too. And SpongeBob tries to go to Squidward's house. Look, I'm sure if these scenes were made today, there'd be a lot more energy, and yeah, I can kind of understand why it has to be so slow, because you have to understand SpongeBob's problems with having to sleep. You need a house to sleep. That is kind of the message of half this episode. But yeah, this little bit with SpongeBob and Squidward is pretty funny. It's not amazing or anything, but it does have a decent payoff with Squidward finally realizing what he's doing, letting SpongeBob sleep with him. I don't know why Squidward doesn't realize it, probably for comedic timing purposes. But yeah, Squidward's role in this is pretty decent. A bit jarring coming right after he stood up for the little guy in pizza delivery just 10 minutes earlier, but I do kind of understand being the grumpy neighbor, having to put up with SpongeBob every day. He'd be kind of happy with SpongeBob finally leaving. But here's a bit more of a visual problem with this episode. Squidward gets pretty slender around this point. Like, you'll notice it also in I Was a Teenage Gary, another episode that Ennio Teresen worked on. Don't know if it's any correlation, but it does look creepy. It doesn't really happen after he leaves the show, and I'm kind of happy because of that, because it's not even like meme funny, it's just kind of weird looking. Another thing that isn't too good about this episode, honestly, is that SpongeBob's parents don't have much personality. I can kind of understand it here because this is their first appearance and they only appear at the very end. But they don't really try to add anything to them as the series goes on, and that's a bit underwhelming. I'd like to see more of them, and not just in background shots like in Big Birthday Blowout. Thing with SpongeBob's hat in this scene, his green hat, is that some people mistake this for like an early part of the show. It disappears here. Some people think that because there is a style of it around, that people think SpongeBob was meant to wear a green hat at points. Don't know why it hasn't returned. It looks pretty decent on him. But yeah, I do kind of associate it just with Home Sweet Pineapple. Oh, Patrick is getting pretty loud. But I do understand he's never going to see SpongeBob again because apparently his parents don't live in Bikini Bottom at this point in the show's history. Oh, this is great. Such a satisfying ending here with the seed growing and vibrating and shooting out a new pineapple that crushes Squidward, and SpongeBob's back forever. He is going to stay around forever because it's been 20 years and he still hasn't left Bikini Bottom. But yeah, I can tolerate this sort of Deus Ex Machina when it is to make the characters happier, to make the audience happier. It is kind of fun anyways, and I really do like Squidward having to be trapped. Kind of looks like he's smiling from this angle, but not really here. He does kind of look very distraught with having to live with SpongeBob forever. And I do really like Roger Bumpus's delivery of that last line. It's perfect. So yeah, that's Pizza Delivery and Home Sweet Pineapple. The latter got its own DVD release in 2005. It was a pretty worthy episode to have its own DVD release. Not the most worthy, but yeah, I can see Home Sweet Pineapple on a shelf and see why people will buy that. But you're much better off getting the DVD releases or the box sets for season 1 and 3 and maybe 4 onward, but I digress. Again, question of the week this week is, what is your favorite SpongeBob meme? Let me know in the comments and it might be featured on the show next time. But for now, goodbye for now.